So imagine you are holding the actual physical written law right in your hand, like the manual,
Right.
and you are reading it literally word for word over the phone to a provincial court employee. And this is the exact person whose entire job, I mean, their literal 9 to 5 existence, is to process this specific law.
Yeah, they are supposed to be the expert.
Exactly. And you aren't yelling or anything. You're just trying to understand a super basic sequence of events. You point out that step A is supposed to lead to step B.
Because that is what the manual says.
Right. And then you just ask a really simple question about why that didn't happen in real life.
And then you just get this silence.
Yes, this terrified, echoing silence on the phone.
Yeah.
And then the employee goes into this rambling, spiraling attempt to justify something that makes zero sense.
It's wild to listen to.
It really is. And then, the craziest part, the court employee completely loses their train of thought and asks this haunting question. They just say, is that adding up now?
Which is such a massive tell. They aren't even explaining it to you anymore.
No, not at all.
They are basically pleading with you to just accept this illusion so they don't have to look at the broken machinery themselves.
Seriously. And when the caller's like, no, it's not adding up at all, the employee just gives up. They literally just admit it and say, I don't know.
I don't know from the registry clerk, the gatekeeper.
I cannot stop thinking about that moment. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are, well, honestly, today we are trying to piece together this puzzle where the pieces seem to be from completely different games.
It really feels that way.
We have this huge stack of really revealing sources in front of us. We have the transcript of that exact phone call we just mentioned.
Yeah, the video transcript.
Right. Plus, these incredibly detailed, minute-by-minute legal notes tracking this one specific roadside police encounter. And we have this timeline of a concept the sources call a paper fortress.
That is a great name for it, honestly.
It is. And finally, we have these dense, kind of surreal philosophical texts that dissect the court as a machine and this whole linguistic trap of the word possession.
It is a massive amount of material.
It is.
And the deeper you read into it, the more you get this creeping sensation that you are looking at the blueprints for, like, a parallel legal system.
Wait, what do you mean by parallel?
I mean one that operates right out in the open, but entirely outside of the structural boundaries that are supposed to govern it.
Okay, wow. So our mission today is to map this all out. We are going to reconstruct this entire sequence of events step by excruciating step.
We have to, yeah.
Because we want to understand how a system that holds the ultimate power over human freedom can just, operate on autopilot, completely bypassing the judges who are supposed to be driving the car.
But before we take a single step further, I need to lay down a really foundational ground rule for everyone listening.
Okay, lay it on us.
This is not optional context, right? This is the lens through which this entire discussion has to be viewed.
Right.
The sources we are dissecting today describe a sequence of events that looks indistinguishable from a systemic loophole or like an administrative trap. It looks deeply flawed.
Oh, absolutely.
However, our function today is strictly analytical. We are just reading the blueprints.
We aren't here to burn the building down.
Exactly. We are not taking political sides here. We have no interest in left-wing or right-wing framing.
Yeah, that's not what this is about.
We are not endorsing any attacks on the police or the court registry or the justice system as a whole. Our sole objective is to take the mechanics and timelines documented in these specific materials and hold them up to the light.
We're just reporting on the mismatch between the manual and reality. That is literally it.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand how deeply weird this parallel reality is, we have to start with the baseline rules.
Right, the official manual for how society is supposed to work.
Yeah. So let's talk about the structural separation of powers.
This is the absolute bedrock of modern democratic legal systems. If you compress it down, you basically have 3 distinct pillars.
Okay, 3 pillars.
And they are kept separate for a very specific reason, which is to prevent any one group from acting as judge, jury, and executioner.
Right, that makes sense. So pillar number 1 is the police.
Yes, the investigative arm. Their mandate is to be out in the physical world.
Okay.
They gather facts, respond to incidents, maintain immediate order, and collect information to bring into the system. They are basically the censors of the state.
But they don't get to make the final call, right?
No, not at all. They just hand the raw data over to pillar number 2, which is the Crown.
The prosecutors.
Exactly. They act as the institutional gatekeepers.
So they look at what the police found and decide what to do with it.
Right. They are supposed to look at the raw data collected by the police in the cold light of day and ask, Does this actually meet the legal standard to proceed?
Like, is there a reasonable prospect of conviction?
Yes, they filter out the noise.
Okay. And if it passes that filter, it goes to the final boss. Pillar number 3, the courts, the judges.
The independent referees. The judges are the only ones who hold the constitutional authority to actually weigh the evidence impartially and apply the law to restrict a citizen's freedom.
So police investigate, Crown screams, judge decides. It is a linear, logical flow.
It is supposed to be, yeah.
But the specific legal mechanism at the absolute center of this bizarre case study we are looking at is something called a Section 810 peace bond.
Right.
And this just throws a massive wrench into how people usually think about the law.
We have to be incredibly precise here, because when most people think of the justice system, they think of punitive justice.
Like, you do the crime, you do the time.
Exactly. You committed a crime in the past, the state proved it, and now you are being punished.
Okay.
A Section 810 peace bond is fundamentally different. It is a mechanism of preventative justice.
Preventative, meaning like pre-crime. We're talking Minority Report stuff here.
I mean, in a mechanical sense, yes. It is designed to restrict your liberty based on the apprehension of future conduct.
Wait, really? Just based on fear?
Yes. The fear that you might cause personal injury or that you might damage property. You haven't necessarily done the thing yet.
But the state is stepping in anyway.
Right. The state steps in to restrict your movements to ensure you don't do it.
Okay, stop right there. Am I crazy, or is that terrifying? If the state is going to restrict my fundamental freedoms like where I can go, who I can talk to, based purely on a prediction of what I might do, the rules for that have to be ironclad.
They absolutely have to be.
You can't just throw restrictions on someone because you have a bad vibe about them.
Which is exactly why the official manual for a Section 810 peace bond is meticulously rigid. The potential for abuse is just astronomically high.
So what are the actual rules then?
The law mandates a strict, unyielding sequence. Step 1, a formal, physical document called an information must be sworn under oath.
Sworn under oath. So someone has to put their name on the line.
Yes, under penalty of perjury, stating their fears and the grounds for them.
Okay, so that's the foundational document, the match that starts the fire.
Exactly. Then step 2, and this is the critical failure point in our sources, that sworn information must go directly to a judge or a justice of the peace.
A judge has to see it.
Yeah. Yes. The judge must independently review the sworn document, hear the allegations, and determine if there are actual, reasonable grounds for this fear.
So the judge is the mandatory filter here.
A completely non-negotiable filter.
Okay.
And then step 3, only if the judge is satisfied by that sworn evidence. The court itself, not the police, issues a summons or a warrant compelling the person to appear.
Swear it, review it, summon them. That's 1, 2, 3.
Swear it, review it, summon them. The entire apparatus is designed by statute to be driven by the court.
Wait, so how does that even happen?
How does what happen?
The phone call, the transcript we started with. The caller is describing police officers out on the street, standing on the pavement, handing out documents that already have mandatory court dates for Section 810 peace bonds printed on them.
Right.
If a judge has to see the sworn document first, before any court date can theoretically exist in the universe, how is a cop writing a date on a piece of paper in the rain? Am I missing something fundamental here?
You aren't missing anything at all. That massive, glaring impossibility is the exact paradox that caused the registry clerk's brain to short circuit.
So it's just not supposed to happen.
Mechanically, under the written text of the law, what you just described is impossible.
It doesn't line up, though. Right. It physically cannot happen if the rules are real.
A police officer out in the field simply does not possess the statutory authority to bypass the judicial review. They cannot invent a court date out of thin air for a preventative peace bond and compel attendance on the spot.
Because they're skipping the judge entirely.
Yes. By doing so, they are entirely amputating the judge from the process.
I'm trying to visualize this. It's like, okay, imagine you buy a highly secure vault to keep your valuables safe.
Okay.
You get it delivered, you unpack it, and the instruction manual explicitly says, only the master key can open this vault. The master key is held securely at the bank.
Right, that's the rule.
That's the design. But then you look over, and the delivery driver is just casually jimmying the vault open with a plastic butter knife he found in his truck, and the vault just pops open.
That is exactly what is happening.
The manual says one thing, but the physical reality of the object is operating on completely different much terrifyingly looser terms.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The registry clerk on the phone is reading the manual about the master key,
Right.
but the caller is standing in the living room watching the delivery guy use the butter knife. The gap between the textual promise of judicial oversight and the operational reality on the asphalt was so impossibly wide.
The clerk had no vocabulary to bridge it.
Exactly. Hence, I don't know.
Okay, but if the official blueprint is just being blatantly, casually ignored, how does an actual human being end up trapped in this? Because a butter knife shouldn't actually lock you in a cage.
It shouldn't, no.
Let's walk through this minute-by-minute timeline provided in the sources. We're looking at a very specific, heavily documented case study from British Columbia.
Right. Starting on June 2nd, 2023. Let's set the physical scene.
Okay.
We have an individual at their own private residence. The police arrive, and this individual is arrested under Section 264.1 of the Criminal Code.
Uttering threats to cause death or bodily harm, I mean, that is not a minor administrative hiccup. That is a heavy, serious criminal allegation.
It is a severe charge that
No.
carries significant weight and procedure.
Right. And for something that serious, you expect the gears of the system to engage in a very specific, heavy way. You expect sirens, booking rooms, the whole 9 yards.
Usually, yes.
But the sources highlight this deeply unsettling list of missing steps. As I was reading this timeline, I kept having to go back and reread paragraphs because the absences were so glaring.
They are very stark.
The person is arrested in their driveway, but they're never transported to a police station.
Never placed in a holding cell.
They are never fingerprinted at that time.
Yeah.
There's no formal booking process.
No.
And there is certainly no bail hearing before a justice of the peace to determine if they should be held or released. How does that even happen?
The individual, according to the notes, simply invokes their fundamental right to silence. They refuse to participate in an interrogation.
So they just stay quiet and faced with silence, and instead of transporting them to actually process this severe criminal charge, what do the cops do?
They pull out a piece of paper.
On the driveway.
Yes. They issue something called a Form 10 undertaking right there, standing on the concrete of the driveway.
Wait, let's talk about the Form 10 for a second. What is that normally used for?
Let's isolate it because its function here is entirely warped. In the traditional mechanical flow of the system, an undertaking of Form 10 is essentially a legally binding contract
Okay.
where you promise to appear in court in exchange for your release. But crucially, it is supposed to be a release document given by an officer in charge after a person has been formally taken to a facility.
Oh, after they've been processed and entered into the system for an offense. It's the receipt you get on your way out the door of the jail.
Precisely. But in this scenario, they're using it as a roadside catch-all, a Swiss Army knife for immediate behavioral control.
And the conditions they scribble onto this single piece of paper in the driveway are breathtaking.
You really are.
Remember, no judge has been consulted here. No evidence has been weighed. But on this form, they list the criminal charge of 264.1, and C, they list the preventative Section 810 peace bond
Both of them, yes.
and the immediate punishments imposed. The police slap on a residential exclusion.
They legally ban this individual from returning to their own home.
Let that sink in for a second. You were standing in your own driveway. A guy with a notepad writes something down, hands it to you, and suddenly, if you walk through your own front door to get a glass of water, you are committing a new criminal offense.
Yes, breaching your conditions.
They also mandate future fingerprinting dates, and they invent a future court date for both the charge and the peace bond, all on the driveway.
What is genuinely fascinating here is the automated cascading power of that single piece of paper.
It's insane.
You have an officer acting as investigator, prosecutor, and judge, all simultaneously on the shoulder of a residential street. No prosecutor has reviewed a file to see if the police even have a shred of evidence.
Right.
No judge has evaluated the necessity of ripping someone out of their home, yet you are handed a document that says your fundamental rights are suspended.
And if you fail to show up to a court date that an officer just fabricated without statutory authority, you will be hunted down. It just feels like dark comedy. It's like a mall security guard writing a completely new penal code on the back of a receipt, handing it to a shopper in the parking lot, and expecting the actual Supreme Court to honor it.
And the nightmare is that the system actually does honor it.
It swallows it whole. But wait, stop. Am I missing something? Walk me through the literal physical sequence of events here, because my brain is actively rejecting this.
Sure, let's break it down.
How does the official multi-billion-dollar court system permanently accept an unauthorized driveway document?
That is the core question.
I mean, a piece of paper has to hit a desk eventually, right? A human being with a law degree or administrative training has to look at this file. Don't they see that a judge never signed off on the peace bond?
You would think so.
How does a file missing its foundational mandatory judicial filter not get tossed in the trash the second it hits the registry inbox?
This is where we transition from the physical reality of the driveway to the digital reality of the bureaucracy. To understand why it doesn't get thrown out, we have to look closely at the source material titled How the Court Really Works.
Oh, the philosophical stuff.
Yes. We have to dive into the profound format clash between human experience and the court's internal operating system.
The novel versus the spreadsheet.
It is the ultimate disconnect. When a human being, a citizen, is dragged into the justice system, they bring novel, they bring context, emotion, fear.
The chaotic narrative of a rainy driveway.
Exactly. The aggressive tone of an officer, the sheer unreasonableness of being banned from their home without hearing. They desperately want the court to read their novel and see the injustice.
They're screaming, "Look at what happened to me! Look at this story!"
But the court machinery is fundamentally incapable of reading a novel. It lacks the optical sensors for narrative entirely.
Wow.
The court is an automated machine that only reads a spreadsheet. It does not care about your feelings, it does not care about the rain, and it does not care about your narrative of injustice.
So what does it care about?
It solely scans for data points to populate specific, unforgiving columns.
What kind of columns? Like, literally, what is it looking for?
Things like jurisdiction, frame, rule, elements, facts, timing. If the data presented fits the formatting of the spreadsheet, the machine ingests it and processes it.
It had ignored everything else.
It is blind to everything outside those cells.
And in the province we are looking at, the ultimate spreadsheet, the master ledger that governs reality, is the Court Services Online System, the CSO.
The CSO database. It is the definitive digital truth of the justice system.
Right.
If it is in the CSO, it is real. If it is not, it never happened. So let's look at the mechanics of how the driveway document enters the machine. When the police issue that Form 10 undertaking, they take their copy back to the detachment and they submit it to the court registry.
So a registry clerk, a real human being, receives this piece of paper.
Yes. But think about the psychology and the workload of that clerk. They have a stack of 50 of these on their desk every morning.
Okay, that's fair.
They operate on a systemic assumption that the police are following the rules. The clerk's job is not to play Supreme Court justice and legally validate every signature and statutory requirement. Their job is data entry.
So they just type it in. They literally just look at the paper and stroke the keys.
They see the Form 10. They look at the box labeled appearance date. They see a date scribbled by the officer. They turn to their screen, open the CSO interface, and they enter into the database. Appearance required? Yes. Date set.
But the database doesn't know the rules.
No. The database is inert cloned. It doesn't know that Section 810 requires a judge to review a sworn information before a date can exist.
It just takes the numbers.
It just accepts the numerical input into the date field. The human clerk acts as a blind data conduit, and the machine accepts the input as absolute truth.
Okay, I track that. I see how the bad data gets in.
Right.
But eventually, a prosecutor, the Crown, has to look at this file to actually run the court case, right?
Yeah.
The paper trail eventually has to catch up to the digital ledger.
You would certainly hope so.
And this is the part of the provided notes that made me physically put the paper down and walk away for a minute.
The timeline anomaly.
The 61-day delay. The sources reveal with stark documentary evidence that the Section 810 information, that absolutely critical, foundational, swear under oath document that by law must exist and be reviewed by a judge before anything else can happen, was actually sworn 61 days after the initial arrest in the driveway.
2 entire months later.
For 2 full months, this individual's locked out of their own house. They are terrified. They are bound by mandatory fingerprinting dates and court dates, risking arrest if they step out of line.
Living under total restriction.
And the entire legal apparatus enforcing this misery officially did not exist yet. The cornerstone hadn't even been poured, but they were already locked in the basement.
It is a temporal paradox created by administrative bypass.
So what happens on day 61? How does the Crown fix this impossible situation when they finally get around to swearing the actual document?
They don't fix it. They camouflage it.
Camouflage it.
This is what we can call the backdated pivot. To validate the severe conditions that have already been unlawfully imposed on this person for 2 months, the Crown finally swears the 810 paperwork. They enter it into the CSO database, but they backdate the entry.
Wait, stop. They alter the official digital ledger. They just change the timeline.
They manipulate the digital record to make it appear as though the information was sworn prior to the court appearance.
That's insane.
They create a completely fictional, retroactive timeline within the spreadsheet to make it look like the system followed its own rules from day one.
This is just... Let me try to build an analogy for this because the mechanics are so twisted.
Please do.
Okay, imagine you walk into a restaurant. You sit down at a table. You don't look at a menu. You don't order anything. A waiter just walks up, force feeds you a plate of food you are allergic to, charges your credit card, and kicks you out.
A terrible restaurant experience.
Right. You leave, totally bewildered and violated.
Yeah.
2 months later, the restaurant manager is looking at the books. They realize, wait, we charged this guy, but we have no order ticket. This is totally illegal.
So what do?
Do they refund you and apologize? No. They go into their point-of-sale system, they create a fake order ticket for the meal they forced on you, and they manually change the date on the ticket to match the day you walked in.
And why do they do that?
Not for me. I already ate the awful food.
Yeah.
They do it so when the corporate auditor comes by next week to check the ledger, the auditor sees a perfectly clean sequence. The auditor sees customer sat down, customer ordered food, food was delivered, bill was paid, the spreadsheet looks flawless. The backdating entirely erases the reality of the assault at the table and replaces it with a tidy administrative fiction.
That is a phenomenal, precise analogy for the mechanism described in these sources. They reverse engineer the paperwork to validate a punishment that was already aggressively administered on the roadside.
It's just, wow.
The spreadsheet is manipulated to cover the sins of the novel.
But this administrative cover-up creates a massive trap for the citizen, because this individual in our case study, who was perfectly aware that they never saw a judge, who knew the driveway paper was legally hollow, rightfully believed the process was illegitimate.
Right?
So they didn't attend those unauthorized fingerprinting or court dates.
Which is a completely logical human response to an unlawful order. But remember, the spreadsheet machine.
The machine doesn't know the dates were unauthorized.
It doesn't know about the 61-day delay or the backdating. It just monitors data points.
It runs a query, right? Like,
Right.
Did a person attend on scheduled date, yes or no?
Exactly. The human didn't show up to the fictional date. The machine registers a no. And because the system operates on automated logic, the machine automatically generates arrest warrants for non-attendance.
So the crap snaps completely shut.
Yes. The citizen's logical refusal to participate in a broken process is instantly converted into a new, entirely valid reason to hunt them down.
Which brings us to the next massive escalation in the timeline. September 24th, 2024. This is over a year after the initial driveway encounter.
A very long time to be under a cloud.
The individual's driving, and they are stopped again by the police at the roadside.
And what is the leverage the police use in this second encounter?
It's the outstanding warrant.
That was automatically generated by the blind spreadsheet machine.
And here we transition from administrative manipulation back to raw physical coercion. The paper fortress manifests in the real world.
The notes are explicit about what happens next. The police officer literally tells the individual, sign this and I won't arrest. Pause and examine that interaction.
Okay.
The officer is using the immediate threat of state force.
Right.
The threat of handcuffs, the back of a cruiser, a jail cell based entirely on a warrant manufactured by a backdated ledger.
Just to extract a signature on a brand new piece of paper.
It is coercion stripped of any pretense.
So they issue a second Form 10 undertaking.
Yeah.
But as they are filling out this new paperwork on the side of the road, something deeply weird happens.
What's that?
That original, incredibly serious criminal charge, the 264.1 for uttering threats that started this entire nightmare, it magically disappears. It is completely absent from the new form.
Where?
How?
Because, as the timeline reveals, it was never actually approved by the Crown. Despite being used to banish this person from their home for over a year, the prosecutors never formally validated the charge.
So it just vanishes like smoke.
Yes.
So all that is left on this new coerced Form 10 is the Section 810 peace bond. And they just invent a brand new October 8th court date for it. They just keep stacking new paper on top of the old rotten foundation.
It is relentless.
But I want to zoom in on the exact language the officer uses during this September stop, because it connects directly to those dense philosophical texts in our source pile. The officer looks at the individual and says, "You have an outstanding warrant."
We have arrived at the linguistic trap of possession. This is where the deep dive gets truly profound.
Let's act like kids for a second and just ask the dumbest, most literal question possible.
Okay.
You have a warrant. physically,
Yeah,
mechanically. How do you have an abstraction?
that's the question.
A warrant is a piece of paper. It is sitting in a manila folder in a filing cabinet in a registry office 3 towns over. Or it is a string of binary code on a provincial server.
It was signed by a judge you have never laid eyes on.
Exactly. How do you, standing in the rain on the shoulder of a highway next to your car, currently have it?
It is a brilliant question, and it is the exact absurdity that those philosophical texts dissect so ruthlessly.
The linguistic illusion of possession.
Yes. What does it actually mean at a base level to have or own a concept or a distant object? The text points out that if you ask a standard person to define the word have, what is their immediate response?
They usually just say, well, it means I possess it.
Okay, so you ask them to define possess.
It means I own it.
And if you press them to define own...
It means it belongs to me. It's mine. I have it.
Exactly. You hit a dictionary loop. It is a closed linguistic circuit.
Have means possess. Possess means own. Own means have.
It is an empty, circular placeholder. There is no independent, physically obtainable meaning there. You are just aggressively swapping synonyms without ever pointing to a physical reality in the universe.
The source text uses this incredibly sticky analogy that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. The jacket at the coffee shop.
Oh, that's a great one. Walk us through it.
Okay, imagine you walk into a completely packed cafe. There's one empty chair left at a table. You walk over, you take your jacket off, and you drape it over the back of the chair to claim it.
Standard coffee shop behavior.
Right. Then you walk 50 feet away to stand in line and order your drink. You are not touching the chair. You are not near the chair.
But if some new customer walks in and tries to move your jacket to sit down...
Everyone in the cafe instantly recognizes this invisible tether between you, standing at a counter, and that fabric on the chair. We all collectively agree, hey, you can't sit there. That person has that chair.
But let's look at that invisible tether under a microscope. Does it exist in physics? Can you measure it?
No.
It is a purely conceptual imposition. It is a social agreement, a shared fiction we place over the physical reality of the room to organize human behavior so we don't have to resort to physical violence every time someone wants a place to sit.
It is a useful illusion.
It is.
Okay, I buy that. It's a useful fiction for polite society.
Yeah.
But applying that concept to the roadside counter, when the armed police officer looks at you and says, you have a warrant, they're invoking that exact same invisible tether.
Yes, they are.
But they aren't using it to save a seat at a cafe. They're weaponizing it.
Precisely. And this is what the philosophical text warns about, the intellectual folly of uninformed language.
Uninformed language.
When undefined primitives, words like have or possess that nobody can actually define without running in a circle, are wielded against regular citizens by the apparatus of the state, it becomes terrifying.
The language itself becomes a tool of subjugation.
Because what is the officer actually communicating in that moment? They aren't trying to engage in a philosophical debate about your metaphysical relationship to a piece of paper across town.
No, definitely not.
The word have in that sentence is not a descriptor. It is a verbal placeholder for the imminent threat of state violence.
It translates directly to, the physical coercive power of the state is currently directed at your body, and if you do not comply, I'm going to put metal handcuffs on your wrists and put you in a cage.
Exactly. The language acts as a trapdoor.
The moment the officer deploys the phrase, you have a warrant, it instantly shuts down all rational inquiry.
You don't get to stand there and argue the timeline.
Right. You can't say, wait, officer, what about the 61-day delay? What about the fact that a judge never signed the initial information? What about the backgated registry entry?
The word warrant acts as a definitive closure mechanism. It overwrites all your objections with a veneer of absolute, unquestionable authority.
The language is meticulously designed to make you feel like a legitimate, fundamental truth of the universe has just been spoken to you.
When in reality, it is just the blunt application of physical power based on a fundamentally broken, retroactively edited administrative spreadsheet.
This is, it's just so much to process. Let's try to pull all the way back and tally this up.
That's a good idea. Let's look at the grand illusion this entire sequence creates.
Because when you list the nevers, in this case study back to back, it sounds like a dispatch from a dystopian novel.
Let's run through the absolute absences in this process.
Okay, so the individual was arrested for a severe criminal charge, but they were never taken to a police station.
Never.
They were never fingerprinted or formally booked. They never had a bail hearing before a justice.
And they never saw a judge to review the preventative peace bond.
Right. They never spoke to a crown prosecutor. They never had a single criminal charge formally validated and approved for trial.
Zero judicial process.
Every single interaction of consequence, every imposition of restriction occurred informally on the asphalt of a driveway or the gravel shoulder of a highway.
Yet despite that absolute vacuum of official procedure, look at the crushing reality of their punishment.
It's unbelievable. They possess a residential exclusion that permanently bans them from stepping foot in their own home.
And they have active arrest warrants hanging over their head like a guillotine.
And all of it rests entirely on what the source notes explicitly and repeatedly call nothing official, just in paper, forms handed out in the rain.
But here is the part that truly makes my blood run cold. This is the absolute perfection of the illusion. If a crusading investigative journalist, or a sharp defense lawyer, or even a different well-meaning judge decides to look up this exact individual's file on the court services online system today, what do they actually see on their screen?
They see a perfectly clean, perfectly standard, utterly unremarkable administrative record.
Exactly.
They don't see the driveway. They don't see the mall security guard writing rules on a napkin. They don't see the massive, glaring 61-day gap where a person was banished from their home without a legal foundation.
No, they see a lawfully sworn information. They see a timeline that flows logically. They see rightful warrants issued for a standard failure to appear.
The digital record acts as a layer of concrete, completely paving over the chaotic, coercive roadside reality.
The cheating is the system. That's the terrifying realization here.
The backdating, the human clerks acting as blind data conduits, the spreadsheet happily accepting unauthorized dates, it sanitizes the entire chaotic mess.
It takes this brutal, irregular street-level reality, dresses it up in a tuxedo, and presents it to the official database as a perfectly functioning justice system.
And because bureaucracies inherently trust their own ledgers, if the database says the steps were followed chronologically, the system will never ever question itself.
The ledger becomes more real than the events that actually occurred.
Here's where it gets really interesting and why you, yes, you listening to this right now, need to care about this deeply.
Because it's easy to dismiss this as just one weird case.
Right. I know it's easy to distance yourself. You might be sitting there thinking, well, this is wild, but I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't get into roadside standoffs with the police, so this hyper-specific administrative nightmare doesn't apply to my life.
But you need to understand the structural implication of what we just mapped out.
When a system that holds the ultimate terrifying power to take away your freedom, the power to legally lock you out of your own house on a whim, demonstrates that it cannot or will not follow its own basic, explicitly written rules.
It builds invisible walls around all of us.
It replaces a predictable legal framework with a maze where you cannot see the boundaries.
Exactly. How can you possibly defend yourself in a maze if the walls keep moving every time you look away?
You can't. If the rules of the game are just whatever an officer decides to scribble on a notepad in the moment, and you know that a computer system will simply backdate the paperwork 2 months later to make that scribble look like a lawful decree, you have absolutely zero defense.
You are at the mercy of the butter knife, while the system points to the manual and says everything is fine.
If we connect this hyper-specific case study to the broader systemic picture, it becomes clear that we are not just looking at a messy paperwork error.
No, this isn't just an underfunded registry glitch or a single rogue officer.
When institutional accountability dies to this degree, when the system's own dedicated staff over the phone cannot explain the mechanical reality because it so fundamentally, violently violates the written law.
We are forced to ask a very dark, very uncomfortable question.
Is the system actually serving justice, or is it exclusively serving its own administrative convenience?
Is the primary goal to protect the public and uphold the rigorous standards of the law? Or is the goal simply to process human beings through a spreadsheet with the absolute minimum amount of friction possible?
Even if that means completely bypassing the independent judge who was put there to protect us.
It's chilling.
I just keep looping back to that poor registry clerk on the phone. Just pausing, spiraling, searching for an answer that doesn't exist.
And finally exhaling, I don't know.
The sheer, unchecked, unaccountable power contained in that I don't know is staggering. It's baffling. We are looking at a total parallel system running in broad daylight, hiding perfectly inside a perfectly formatted database.
It is deeply unsettling. And it leaves us with a conceptual puzzle that I think everyone listening needs to mull over on their own long after this deep dive is done.
What's the puzzle?
It's a question of what reality we actually inhabit. If entire life-altering legal realities, like losing the fundamental right to step foot in your own home or having active coercive warrants issued for your physical arrest, can be generated by a single police officer on a roadside.
And then officially, permanently justified weeks or months later
Yeah.
simply by a clerk changing a date in a computer system.
What actually happens to the foundational pillar of innocent until proven guilty?
Man, it just evaporates.
If the punishment is already being factively, aggressively enforced in the physical world before the official paperwork even exists in the digital world to authorize it, are we actually being governed by laws?
Or are we just being governed by the illusion of a spreadsheet?
It makes you wonder.
That is heavy. It's a lot to carry around. But it's exactly why we do this. We have to look at the machinery. Keep asking those simple, childlike questions when things don't add up.
Keep reading the actual manuals and never assume the machine is reading the same book you are.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.